I'm going to do this video over again only because when I went back to listen to it, there were too many spots that were broken up. So this is a redo. This is going over colorism in the Black community and where that colorism came from. Anytime we know it's colorism, we know it came from slavery. It didn't come from anywhere else when it comes down to America. I'm going to get through this with less tears and more clarity in what I say. Now, the brown paper bag test that was practiced and unfortunately still is a lot of colorism in the Black community, still practiced, came directly from your slave master. And this really gives us a good look at who among us that are still very much a mental slave compared to everyone else. Now, if you have a preference, if you like light skin or dark skin people, that's fine. But when it gets to the point where you mistreat another Black person because they're not the complexion that you like, then that tells me you are very much a mental slave. The backstory, how the brown paper bag carried the color complex from slavery forward. The reason why the slave master used colorism on slaves is to keep you divided and conquered. If he kept the house slave hating the field slave and the field slave hating the house slave, then there's no chance of you coming together to go against the slave master. It was a tool to keep us divided, a tool to make us hate each other. And it worked. I've experienced the colorism. Now, when it comes down to myself, I tend to be a little lighter. And unfortunately, some of these colorism people embraced me, but once I realized how they were, I had to get myself away from them. And I also saw the colorism practice in the church that I attended. The first real friend I had in junior high school was into colorism. And she had this tendency of always treating the dark Black guys bad. And at first I noticed it, but I was like, wait a minute, something ain't right about you. Then I got a chance to meet her whole family. Her entire family was like that. Mother, father, her siblings, they were all like that. They were cool as long as you were a lighter shade. But then when you got darker, they actually got outright nasty. And I ended up ending the friendship with her. And I have to tell you that is pretty much something that has always stayed with me. It always stayed with me because usually when I come across Black people that are practicing the colorism, I tend not to get along with them. I rarely get along with any Black person that practice a lot of heavy colorism, whether it's a male or female. I always notice I never, ever got along with them. I find them to be the boule kind of ones are petty to me. It's petty. But a lot of upper class Black society are steep in colorism in America, unfortunately. I mean, boule or Black aristocrats or whatever you want to call them, they're just not my kind of people. The actual test, along with the so-called ruler test in common use in the early 1900s among upper class Black American societies and families to determine if a Black person was sufficiently white to gain acceptance or admittance. If your skin was darker than a brown paper bag, you did not merit inclusion. So you were just cast aside if you were a dark person. Thousands of Black institutions, including the nation's most eminent fraternity Phi Alpha Phi, Howard University, and numerous church and civic groups, all practice this discrimination. The practice has 19th century antecedents with the Blue Blood Society and has not totally died out. Origins of colorism. How did colorism surface? In the United States, colorism has its roots in #slavery. That's because slave owners typically gave preferential treatment to slaves with fairer complexions, while dark-skinned slaves toiled outdoors in the field. Their light-skinned counterparts usually worked indoors, completing domestic tasks that were far less grueling. Why the discrepancy? Slave owners were partial to light-skinned slaves because they were often family members. So these were the actual offspring of the slave master. Slave owners frequently engaged in sexual intercourse with slave women, and light-skinned offsprings were telltale signs that these unions happened. We know they happened. In the South, when I would go visit and stay with my grandparents for the summer growing up, my grandmother had these group of women, and they were so sweet. And they would come around and just sit on the porch, and they would just sit out there all day and talk. And, they were women up in age. They were not working age women anymore. And I noticed when I was down there, it was not unusual to see a family with one elder Black sibling that was mulatto, and then the rest of the Black siblings would be Black. Okay, and this is very common in the South. If you are from the South and you are around a lot of elders, you would see this. Okay, a lot of those mulattoes came from the result of rape. It has even occurred in my family. Now, we know slaves were raped. Your house slave was raped more than any other slave. And ladies and gentlemen, it didn't matter if they were male or female. Many times your slave master would also rape the male slave as well as the female slaves. On my mother's side, my great-great-great-grandmother was a house slave. And according to the U.S. Census, she had 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl that were all listed as mulatto. Well, the girl was the baby, and that girl was my great-great-great-grandmother. So my great-great-great-great-grandmother was in the house, and then she had 4 mulatto children from her slave master. These are all rapes. And then her daughter, who was my great-grandmother, married a Black man. It's real hard talking about this. It really is. So there was a whole string of mulattoes, but the thing is, a lot of them married Black. I know out of all of my great great-grandmother's children, they all were mulatto, but they all married black. They all had black partners. Well, on my dad's side, I noticed when I was growing up, I had one aunt who was the oldest out of 9 children. 2 died, but 9 children. And she was different from all the other siblings that were black. And I couldn't understand for a while. And then I found out my grandmother was raped. That's where child number 1 came from. She was about 16 years old when she was raped. And then she met my grandfather, and they got married, and the rest of her children are black. It was really difficult because she never wanted to talk about it. Although she did love my aunt, and she raised her, and she did a great job with raising her. And my aunt married a black man, and they live right now in the city of Philadelphia, where I grew up. And I, talk to her often on the phone. And it's hard, when this happened to somebody you really love in your family. It hurts and it's hard. Well, I'm gonna get through this without crying, y'all, because this is really emotional, because I found these things out when I was very young. And it's like anything else. When your family member, if you know they're harmed or hurt, you feel that hurt and pain. That's the emotional and spiritual connection you have with each other. Well, she had this one friend that was like family, my grandmother, and she came over every day, and they would sit on the porch and have coffee, or sometimes they would be out there just nibbling on food and talking to each other. And this lady was so sweet, and came around so much that she was like family, and she got treated like family. Well, I thought she was always blind. I thought she was. And when I was 16, she told me what happened to her, and I was just bawling and crying by the time she got to the end of her story. What happened was she was raped multiple times by the same white man down there in the South. She finally got tired of being raped. So this one time, she decided to fight back. He pushed his 2 fingers so far into her eyes, she went blind. As a result of the rape, she gave birth to 2 biracial children. She said she did not like this white man. She didn't want him. She didn't want nothing to do with him, but he just kept coming around and raping her. Well, she eventually did get married, and she had 4 black children. But when she told me that story, it just brought the reality of so many horrible things that happened to our people in the South. Even after slavery was over. During Jim Crow, that's when a lot of the rapes happened also. And it was terrible because the devil would come around and kick the door in and force the children to watch the rape. Do you know they used to tie black children up, tie them to chairs, and make them sit there and watch their mother get raped by this white devil? Or sometimes they would force the husband and the children to watch the mother get raped. Something sick about these folks where they want you to watch them have sex. And that's why the devil is the creator of the porn industry, because they get off on that kind of sick, sadistic stuff. In the Bible, sex between a man and a woman was sacred. You never allowed anybody into the bedroom that didn't belong there. That was kept between the man and woman, and that's the way it should be. But the devil wants to reveal everything. He wants all his dirty deeds to be seen. So it's very common to see in the South, like I said, one mulatto sibling and then the rest of them are not mulattoes. When I spoke to these elder women, I knew they didn't want to be raped. And it was never their intention to have biracial children. And since being told these stories firsthand by the people it happened to, that's why I don't use the terminology bed wench and bed buck, because that stuff was forced on our people, ladies and gentlemen. They were not willing to lay down. They were forced. It wasn't until Black men finally came together and formed groups like the Deacons for Defense, or formed gangs, that when these horny devils would come into the neighborhood, they would run them off, or they would run the Klan out of the Black neighborhoods. See, the Klan and those old raping devils stopped coming when they realized the Black men were going to fight them back. And when the Klan would show up, the Deacons for Defense would outnumber them and outgun them. So that's when they stopped coming and burning crosses and kicking doors in and snatching people out of bed, because they knew they could no longer get away with that stuff. And actually, that's when gangs, street gangs, were formed. It started out as a means to keep the Klan out of the Black neighborhoods. But street gangs are not what they used to be now. Now they are something totally different. It's a terrible history. If you ever get a chance, if you want to see how prevalent this was, try to get the U.S. Census from especially the 17 and 1800s, and just sit down and go through the pages of the slave masters and the slaves. And you will see page after page after page of mulattoes. So many of them. So many. We have such a complex history, ladies and gentlemen. See, the devil always want to come and tell us that slavery is over. But see, they don't realize the remnants of slavery still lives on. I have a picture of my mulatto great 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 grandmother. Maybe one day when I do a video, I will start showing you the pictures that I have of them from the 1800s. I actually have pictures of my family members from that era. And maybe one day I will compile them together and I'll do a video and show you some of my people. And you'll clearly see that some of them were mulatto from the rapes that occurred in my family during the time of slavery and Jim Crow. And this forms a lot of my attitude of how I feel today. These people aren't all dead. They're elderly now. And they know and lived through Jim Crow. It really was not that long ago, ladies and gentlemen. It really wasn't. Boy, I can tell you guys some stories. I really can. While slave owners did not officially recognize their mixed-race children as blood, they gave them privileges that dark-skinned slaves did not enjoy. Accordingly, light skin came to be viewed as an asset among the slave community, enduring legacy. After slavery ended in the U.S., colorism didn't disappear. In fact, it still lives on today, unfortunately. In Black America, those with light skin received employment opportunity off limits to dark-skinned African Americans. This is why upper-class families in Black society were largely light-skinned. Soon, light skin and privilege were considered one and the same in the Black community, with light skin being the sole criterion for acceptance in the Black aristocracy. Upper crust Black routinely administer the brown paper bag test, which I think is the meanest thing ever, to determine if Blacks were light enough to be socialized with. And that's literally what happens even to this day. And, you know, like most Black families, I have light and dark relatives. It has been exceptionally bad for all Black people in America when it comes down to racism. Even the coon deniers. You know what I discovered about coons? Coons do experience racism, ladies and gentlemen, but they have conditioned themselves to ignore racism as it happens to them. But believe me, it does happen. And it's like a defense mechanism that they use so that they can cope with it. But believe me, they feel it too. You know, you got to understand there are some among us that are just more mentally ill than others. And that's really what it comes down to. Colorism didn't just involve Blacks discriminating against other Blacks. Job advertisements in the mid-20th century revealed that African Americans with light skin clearly believed their coloring would make them more palpable as job candidates. And actually, it did work that way. It did. Writer Brent Staples discovered this while searching the archives of newspapers near the Pennsylvania town where he grew up, and noticed that in the 40s, job seekers often identified themselves as light-skinned. And believe it or not, it did make a difference to whites during that time, whether you were light or dark. To this day, you'll hear many white people will tell you, oh, I don't like dark Black people. It's like it's something dirty about it. And it really isn't. It isn't. You know, um, we just have some people that are melanin rich, more melanin rich than others, but by no means are they less, in my opinion. Zora Neale Hurston was the first well-known writer to air this strange practice in public. The practice is now nearly universally condemned, at least in public, as being an example of colorism. Particularly cogent modern days critique can be found in Kathy Russell's The Color Complex and Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eyes and Marita Golden Don't Play in the Sun. The best known send up of the practice, however, is Spike Lee's scathing and hilarious 1988 movie School Days. Boy, do I remember that. I did not practice colorism. And the reason why I didn't is because I have both light and dark skinned family members that were in my household growing up. I had a light complected mother and a dark father. Okay. And I kind of came out kind of in between, but kind of more on my mom's side. But the thing is, when I read through some of the comments and I see hatred for dark men or dark women, it's a reminder of our enslaved past and how so much harm has been passed down through the century among Black people when it comes down to colorism. And it's a reminder that we must do better among our own people for doing these things. Now, my thing is, if you got a preference for light or dark, fine, have your preferences. But when you start lashing out and mistreating another Black person because they are not the color that you prefer, then that's a problem. And that problem is you. It's not them, it's you. In America, we're all still niggers. No matter how light or dark you are, and you will be treated in that manner, whether you like it or not. I love my people. Whether you're light or dark, I love you. Because we're all in this battle together. Some of us are more beat up than others in this battle. Some of us are tired. And some of us will be casualties in the battle. And it doesn't matter whether you're light or dark. It doesn't matter. Because as a Black collective, we are all a threat to your Caucasoid society. They see us all a threat, light or dark. Colorism is something I hope one day we can all put behind us, as well as the male and female divisions. and all of the things that are keeping us from uniting. Religion and education. It's just so many things dividing us right now. I really believe Trump is going to be the one to bring us together. One thing I know about racism, sooner or later it will backfire. It will backfire. But please tell me what you think, ladies and gentlemen. Please leave your comment and subscribe. And if you can donate to my channel, please do. Peace, family.